what we have today for you, the topic is going to be secure code training. And how do we know, or how can we assess that our dev team actually understands secure coding? Do we have the right people to even figure this out on our team? And what can we do to improve the coding skills? And how do we make this sort of uh, a learning process so that we know that over the time we're getting better and better and better? I think this is a very important topic, because dev teams are getting hacked. And one of the things that are, the worst thing that can happen almost is if somebody adds a line of code and you compile it and now it's digitally signed and it goes out, your product goes out to all your customers with a backdoor. So we really don't want that, and a lot of risks around this, and we want to address this. So this is sort of the topic of today. We have with us a great team. We have Itzik, who is Wiser's CTO and R&D manager. And we have Robbie, one of the best hackers that I know of. And he also is responsible for our videos and some of our CTFs. So we have really a great team that is very knowledgeable about this. And yeah, so let's get started. I'll start with you, Itzik. Okay, as an R&D team manager and a CTO, and you've done this for like many years, right? For like over 20 now.
Yeah, I
So
won't reveal the number, but yeah.
yeah, a lot of teams. So how do we even start with assessing if our dev team is even understands the risk? Like, how much do they know? Because when we hire people, very often we check their skills, around logic, around frameworks. This is what I've seen in a lot of the interviews. Many times we don't have the skills even to ask them questions around security. So when we hire them, we don't necessarily understand if they're good or bad at understanding the vulnerabilities and writing secure code. So what do you suggest, and how do we assess our team?
I think it's a great question. I think there's no one good answer, but I'll tell you what I think and where I'm coming from, how it works. So first of all, I think there are three levels of knowledge, right? There is the first level is kind of like when you look at least the OWASP top 10, right? Every couple of years, they come up with a definition of the most important ones per likelihood of happening and risk and so forth. So they have the top 10. And so if you look at the top 10, the first level is understanding what those are, that they exist and what those are. Like if you look at injection type, uh, series of kind of like of vulnerabilities, there are SQL injections, NoSQL injection, code injection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, a lot of types of injection. If you can tell me that they exist, that's the first level, okay? And you understand pretty much kind of like high level what those are. So that's the first level. The
That's my
second level,
level. So you
what?
can ask me about OWASP 10, and I probably know to tell you what each topic is about. I know what SQL injection is, I know what XSS is, but ask me to find it in the code. Eh.
Exactly. So that's the second level. You're right on the spot here, because the second level is being able to spot it. I think that's starting to get significant. If you know how to spot it, at least you know that there's a problem. Now you have to figure out what to do with that problem. Not necessarily easy and straightforward, but that's at least a progress, because you can spot the problem. You can say, here's a problem, and I know it's risky, and now I have to figure it out. And then the third level is putting it into practice, meaning that A, you can spot it, but B, you can also come up with a mitigation that actually works. And you also understand the risk broadly. So that's kind of like more, make it a second nature to think about it as you write code. So that's the third level. That's the holy grail. That's where we want to go. We want to be able to put our developers at a spot where they know that those exist, they can spot them, but they can also mitigate them, because it becomes almost a second nature for them to spot and remediate, and not even get into those areas where there are issues.
So let's
So
talk about
you asked about how do I assess, right? So to assess the first level, you can start with a quiz. So it's very high level. You can start with very simple quizzes like, what is this? What is that? What is this? So that's simple. You can do that at an entry level for any developer that you hire or for your existing developers. If you want to kind of like get into the second and third level, you have to put code in their face on, in front of them. And they're kind of like, they have to spot it. They have to tell you, hey, there's an SQL injection here. Hey, there's a potential OS command injection here, and et cetera, et cetera. They can look at the code and spot it. So that's second level. If you want them to actually show you that they're capable of solving it, mitigating it, you need to actually put it into practice. And there are multiple ways to do it, but mostly like games, like here's a code, fix it. Okay? Make it work, make it not be vulnerable, right? You spotted it, great, but now make it work. So that's kind of like the way I think about it.
In this moment, I think a lot of developers are still in that first phase where they have heard of things. They've probably seen it maybe through the years a couple of times, but they don't fully like understand what it is. And I think that this first level that we talk about, I think this is a kind of level where every CTO kind of has to be. They just need to have an overall understanding of globally what some risks may be and whatnot. Then developers are preferably already at that second level, that they can already kind of see it in their code and make sure that they don't code vulnerably on purpose to say, but vulnerable in a way that's very obvious. And then on the third level right now, we have the hackers that know like all the tiny details about everything. But the goal is to get those developers from that first or second level and get them as close to a hacker as possible. And to give you an example from the real world, so I work as a penetration tester. So every week I see a new application and I hack into it. And a couple of weeks ago, I found an XSS on a company. So I report it. And a day later, the developer comes back to me and says, hey, I fixed the XSS. And after 10 minutes of looking, I found a bypass for their XSS. So they fixed it in a very simple way that kind of fixed the first payload, but it was not a complete fix at all. It clearly showed that this developer had no real understanding of what the actual vulnerability was. They just blocked my payload from executing. So, well, I sent it back. The developer comes back the next day. Hey, I fixed that again. I found another bypass. And this went on for like 4 iterations until I sat down with him, had a call with him, and told him, look, the root issue is here. And this is what you need to understand. You can't just go blocking payloads and fixing that. It was very clear that this developer was somewhere between level 1 and 2, where he should have really been between level 2 and 3. So, yeah.
I think that's such a great example because I've seen this story happen over and over again, almost in every pen test, where a lot of developers just don't understand the root cause. And if it's only when you understand the root cause of where this is coming from that you can sort of like nip it in the bud, like you can make sure that this is dealt with. Because if you're just looking at the payload and you're saying to him, or her, like, oh, there's an issue here that they fix that, but then you use other characters and other mechanisms, you can encode it, you can do so many things to continuously bypass it. Which is actually, me thinking for a second, it's very similar to how like application firewalls work, right? They don't actually fix the problem, right? Like, yes, by the way, guys, I'm not saying don't use application firewalls, but I'm saying in reality, they're addressing the symptom, right? They're not addressing the code issue. So you come up with a rule, somebody bypass the firewall, you fix it, and then they bypass again and again and again. A lot of hackers that I talk to actually enjoy this mouse and mouse and cat, because it makes their payload look cooler, right? Mm-hmm. It makes it look very, very sophisticated, but they always find a way to bypass those firewalls. So this goes back to really putting into practice what you've learned. So, Itzik, why don't you show an example of, let's say, just 3 examples of like, the level 1, level 2, and level 3 in terms of like,
right,
like quiz versus exercise. Like, show us sort of the examples. Level 1, I think, is the easiest one. There's no really
right,
to even talk about. Like, ask me what is XSS, I'll probably tell you.
right.
High level SQL injection, like I know what it is as a topic. I think level 2 requires some training, right? You can't just
Right,
jump into
right.
level 2
So
without training.
level two is not even enough to spot one, because you have different ways, and there's some chaff sometimes, and it's hard to find those vulnerability. They don't stand out, and you don't just spot them. But if you know how to look at code and you have the practice, so that's more about practice, right? So that's, you look at code, you look at an example of a code, right? When you look at a SQL injection, for example, you look at a string that is building a query that runs in the database. You look at the way that the query is built; it's not parameterized, and then you see that there's a variable that comes from the input, and even if it's kind of like there are some attempts to maybe even sanitize the input, it's not necessarily full. So again, the root cause is, don't use that method. Use an ORM, use a parameterized query, use a safe stored procedure. There are ways to handle it. But if you handle the symptom, if you try to sanitize it, it's too hard and it's too problematic to do. And there are so many characters and so many bypasses, and the syntax is so tricky that there's always a way, not always, but 99% of the times, there's a way to bypass it and figure out a way to kind of like overcome it. So again,
let's show this
level.
let's show this within Wiser.
Yep.
So we'll give you, because I want to make this also practical today for people.
Absolutely.
So what we're going to do now, we're going into Wiser, and we want to show you sort of how you can assess your team in terms of even before we train them. We just want to show you the levels of understanding. So let's start with level 2. Let's just show them the type of questions that, if you want to quickly assess your team, you can either have them go through training or just have them do the quiz, and just show them the type of questions.
Yes. So for example, as a quiz, you go through the XSS topic. There are questions. What is XSS? How to exploit it, and etc. Those require listening. If you're not listening to the topics and you don't understand what they're saying, you won't be able to kind of like solve it, or you won't be able to answer the quiz correctly. And so you'll have to, for example, prototype pollution, even if you know it by name, you have to understand what it is, and to actually be able to answer questions that are a little deeper than just kind of like understanding what it is high level, okay? Because it's detailed here. And every topic has those quizzes, and we'll take you through kind of like at least being able to understand it deeply. Then there's the game itself, right?
Before that, hold on, go back to the so again, I know what prototype pollution is, right? Because I've learned, because I've done these courses as well, and you guys have taught me about all of those things. So I actually know how to talk about it, right? So I'm knowledgeable, but again, there's no way in the world that I will be able to spot them in the CTFs. I'm able to do the simple CTFs, maybe, the one paper, but most of them I'm not able to do. We'll talk about the CTFs in a second. That's the game that you talked about. So again, if I didn't get training, I wouldn't be able to understand this. And I think you have two ways. You can either have your team just do the quiz without doing the learning and see where they are, sort of just get a better understanding if they know deep dive into XSS, deep dive into IDORs, if they understand the concepts. And the results of this test will sort of let you know, first of all, where your team stands in terms of secure coding. I would advise to probably have them do the course and then do the quiz. I think it's just more, it's a better use of their time, but you can go either way. Now let's talk about how do you actually assess the team.
So level 2 and 3, right? The ones we talked about. So once you've done through the courses, you can go to the games. Okay, so the game here is capture the flag, CTFs. And when you go to the game, when you start, the games are actually built of a piece of code. Okay, so you're looking at a piece of code. You can copy it. You can actually deploy it locally and so forth. You can see the complexity here. It's easy, and every CTF that exists has different complexity. This is hard. This is easy, and so forth. Okay, so you can go one by one and look at the code. Every piece of code has typically one vulnerability. Okay, so we're trying to focus. And what you want to do is, first, we said level 2 is spot the vulnerability, right? Specifically, let's take this one, for example. Okay, it says easy, right? And I need to change a message of some sort, okay? So if I scroll down and I start to kind of like look at the code here, that's an API endpoint, okay, that's fine. Oh, but here is HTML. Let's take a look at that, for example, okay? So I see a nonce here, which is the CSP and so forth, so it's kind of protected. But, I still see, a situation where, in the code, okay, I'm placing here document right of an argument that is getting from the query, okay, the name. So that spotting wise, I stop here and I say there must be an XSS here, okay? How do I exploit it? I don't know, okay? How do I mitigate it? How do I fix it? Maybe I kind of like have an idea. But the best way to make it second nature is to actually think a little bit like a hacker, okay? What would a hacker do? How would they exploit it? And there are multiple ways, right? But in this case, I'm going to try to tackle this. So so we tackled the second stage, which is, okay, I can find a vulnerability. Now, I don't want to spoil this one because it's pretty new. So I'm going to go to one that is older, okay? This particular one is a command injection vulnerability. So that's a retired challenge. You can see that it's retired. There's also a write-up here, which is great because you can read through what the code looks like, and you can kind of like understand the code and get some impressions on what was wrong and takeaways and so forth. But if I want to solve it, again, I need to first spot the issue, right? So I said it's a command injection, and I can see here something that looks suspicious, which is an alternative for eval. So the function constructor, which I can actually enclose some text, and it makes it code. And that's really, really dangerous, right? So maybe the developer thought, oh, if I don't use eval here, when I use string function, that could be a little safer because it's running in a sandbox. It's not running in the app. It's running within a function. Maybe in this case, it's not solving the problem. It's not really a solution for anything, especially since the developer forgot and not forgot, but actually used require here. Because they wanted to achieve something. So let me share with you what they wanted to achieve and how do I solve it. So first of all, identifying the problem, I look at this line, I'm saying, yeah, this is probably vulnerable for command injection. How? Let's figure it out. I have to think like a hacker. So
but before that, even if you stop for a second, before that, going back to what Robbie said at the beginning, the previous code could have been eval, and then somebody would have spotted it, or a pen tester would have said, what are you doing? Never use eval, because they know never use eval. So they said, okay, what do I do? Oh, let's use this because runs in a sandbox. This is safer. So they came up with a solution that they thought is good, but again, they didn't understand the root cause of the problem, and the solution doesn't solve the problem.
Exactly. Because and they also left a door here. That's why it's kind of like a medium. It's not very hard. But in order to tackle it, since this is an endpoint, right? I can use Postman, right? And I understand, okay, for example, that I can use the first argument require and use math.js to actually use square root of something. Okay, that's an intended behavior of that API. Okay, when I run that, let me just put that here. When I run that, I should get the square root of 2000. Okay, that was the intended behavior. The calculated was supposed to be a little more sophisticated, allowing you to use math.js methods. But that is opening a can of worms, because once I have the argument 0 is the require, I can require potentially other libraries. I will not be able to require libraries that weren't imported. So I won't be able to to import any library, but FS is part of Node.js, and hence it is it's something that I can require. And why do I mention FS? Because if I have FS, I can read files, and I can do dangerous things like reading the passwd file. Okay, so I'm requiring fs, and then I'm using a method here, read file sync, to actually read the passwd. And that's the purpose, or that's the goal of the challenge. Read the content of OS passwd. So if I go to Postman, I hit send, here you go. I've exposed the content of the file of passwd right here in the console. Okay. And so what we've done with the Wiser game is, if you post that same, post here, what Wiser would do for you, it will go check. And if you actually expose passwd, you won the game. And there could be multiple ways to do it. But that goes to the third level. The third level here is, I was able to spot the issue, but I actually understand deeply how it works, so I can actually exploit it. If I understand how to exploit it, I'm so much closer to a solution, because I know now what I shouldn't do, okay? What I shouldn't be doing. So if I hit hack here, boom. I was able to solve it. I'm now going to claim my spot. In this case, since it's retired, I'm not going to get a spot on the leaderboard just because it's retired, so I don't get the points. But I was able to play it. Does it make sense?
I think it does. And what's great about this, first of all, so we've deployed this a while ago, and what I found was very surprising is, we started with thinking about complex scenarios, and when we did the public events, we had hackers join, and they were able to solve those complex scenarios. And we imported those scenarios to the Wiser for developers. Almost no one was able to solve it. So we started lowering the level. So we went from 3 peppers to 2 peppers. Still, hardly any developers were able to solve this. So we had really to push down the level significantly, so developers would be able to solve even the simplest scenarios. And I think this comes to show how big the gap is between what developers know about secure coding versus what hackers know about secure coding. And I think a great way to assess, or just to come back on how to the original question, how to assess your team, you have, I would say, 2 paths, 2 main paths. One is a quiz, which I think you should do regardless, even if you come up with a Google Doc. Like, you should assess your team's knowledge, I think, yesterday. You can't not know how good your dev team is at spotting or in secure coding in general. It's I think a very important thing to know about in order to be able to improve, right? We're talking about progress. In order to improve, we need to know where we stand right now. So that sort of creating a baseline is very important. So there's 2 options. One, like I said, is a quiz. The other one, you can do those CTFs. And by the way, I haven't mentioned it, but those CTFs are freely available if you log into the Wiser platform. So if you have your team go in and at least solve 1 CTF out of the 6 that are available, you'll be able to know how good your team is at actually spotting and understanding how to mitigate unsecure code.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
that's with regards to the CTF platform. There are different platforms out there. Wiser is one of them. We've done it specifically for developers. However, I've seen companies work with other CTF platforms. There's Hack the Box and others, which are a little bit more geared to hackers. They're more around the entire box, and the scenarios are more complicated. As you can see, the scenarios here are very short, very focused on a single vulnerability, and we cover the entire OWASP 10, which allows your team to practice what they've learned as well. So going back to Itzik, what's your suggestion around doing this over the year?
Yeah. So I think it's a great kind of like challenge for an R&D manager to think about that. The best thing you can do is, first of all, continuously assess, because things change. OS 10 every couple of years updates. There are new vulnerabilities, new libraries, so you always have to be ready on the trigger with your abilities of your team. And so you need to assess, and you need to know where you stand. So continuously do that. What is do that is actually go through the courses, and there are a lot of platforms out there, Wiser included, that you have the first level covering OS 10 at a deep dive, and then there's a lot of other topics that are either under OS 10 or additional things that you need to think about. Borderline, DevOps and developers like Terraform and AI and all sorts of topics that are advanced that you probably want to cover, because things are going to become more and more on those areas. So first of all, continuously always assess, continuously train your team. Try to train in portions and not everything together, because people don't remember. If you do the course in the beginning of the year, chances are by the end of the year, people remember only part of it and vaguely, right? So if you always think about it, and that's the way the approach we've taken with Wiser is, those CTFs update every 2 weeks, you have another one. And in terms of topics, kind of like our recommendations is doing it monthly. Doesn't always work for folks. Some people want to do it quarterly, half a year. It's not a problem. But always think about it as a continuous process, and it's not something that you start and end and that's it, you're done. You're not compliant. Like, to be compliant, you have to continuously work and do that. So for example, how do you continuously do CTFs? You have to assign time for it. You have, as a manager, as a C-level, you have to dedicate time, and you say, this is important enough that I will kind of like think about it as we plan our time availability and so forth, building the product and so forth. And I'm going to kind of like take some points off your table and be able to kind of like allocate time for you to learn. Okay. So once the C level is bought in and you allocated time, first you show how important it is to your team. Then you can plan for events. That's one way to do that, right? Every quarter, every half a year, you decide. What is the event? Like in Wiser, there's always 6 available CTFs at any point in time. So put a pin in the calendar. Say in January 15, whatever, or I don't know, June 15, we're going to do an event. Get ready. So we're going to allocate time. Everyone is going to get there. I'm going to do it, I don't know, full day, half a day, whatever you choose. And let's make sure that people at least solve, a simple 1 or 2, right? So they work together. It's also fun, and it's very educational. And people research, and people actually play with it, and they collaborate and so forth, and they solve those CTF challenges. And then at the end, you can produce a report. You say, okay, in January, we played this game. We had like 6 challenges, and only 10% were able to solve anything, right? And now we're doing it 6 months later after some training and so forth, and people were over the year, through the year, kind of like solved a few. They solved 2 or 3 on average, okay? So we're seeing actually more activity, and we're seeing like 20%, maybe 30%. So we can see a trend. So always be measuring it, and always make sure that you kind of like initiate and allocate time, initiate games and allocate time for your developers to go through it, because it won't happen without any attention. Some people will be engaged and like the topic of secure coding, and some people will find it hard to engage. So you need to kind of like allocate time and make sure that people do it.
On that note, I do a lot of pen tests, and I have to bring bad news to a lot of developers, say, well, it was not a good result. And you have 2 types of developers. There's a type that really takes it personally, but there's also the type that thanks me and says, thank you for highlighting these issues, because now I can go to my manager and show them, look, we do not have enough time to train ourselves to write secure code. This report clearly shows that we need more time. And I think that mindset of like using what was found and asking for more time to actually train yourself is such a great mindset. And if an R&D manager can already give that time without requiring a bad report beforehand, that's obviously a double bonus. So yeah, great stuff.
I think the approach should be one more point where I think it is important. change the approach. It's like finding bugs is good. Okay, finding bugs is not bad. Finding vulnerabilities is good because you found them and not attackers, right? Everything you find is good. You should high five when you find it. Okay, not be insulted and take it offensive because you found something and you spared vulnerability from kind of like your system. So you should be happy about it. The approach should be you found things. That's good. That's not bad. Let's not kind of like make it a bad scenario.
What I'm hearing here, which I like, is one, you need to get the buy-in from the C-level. Like it's going to be very hard, and some, unfortunately, some R&D managers are not aware of the risks themselves, so that's a problem. It's hard for them to push their team to write secure code if they themselves are not aware of all those risks and they're being pushed to deliver a product. So if you're, in the security team, you also have to sell it to the R&D manager and get their buy-in before you do this. I think it will be very, very helpful. Second thing is allocate time, right? Not just tell them just do it over the weekends, right? You have to allocate time, whether it's points from the sprint or whether it's an event that you do once a quarter and you allocate like 3 hours and then, people go and do this. Third thing is the report, because as a result of that event, you will also see where the weaknesses are. Maybe everybody knows about XSS right now. Maybe we need to focus on IDORs. Maybe we need to focus on other things. And we'll be able to clearly see that in the report of what people were able to solve and not able to solve. And lastly, which, thank Robbie for saying this, because I think this is very important. This is a career opportunity. So if you flip it and you talk to people about how important this is for their own career, and hopefully hiring managers will also look for those skills in the future, and you can basically show that you are very good and you've solved this amount of CTFs, and this will give you an advantage over other candidates because it shows out of the box thinking and it shows that you took the extra step. It shows passion, to be honest, to coding. That's how I see this. So let's move to another topic around this. Robbie, so you're, like I said, you're the guy responsible for doing the videos, and people love them. Like they're short, they're to the point. You're also on social media, so you really have a good understanding of content in general. What's the secret sauce? How do you? What's your approach to creating content that people will actually want to watch?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I try to do is I might try to make everything real. All the videos that we make, all the recommendations we make, all the vulnerabilities we cover, they originate from real scenarios that actually happened. And this makes security much more tangible, and definitely for developers, they can actually see code that they could relate to. They could say, oh, I could write something like that I'm seeing here on the screen is vulnerable. I think that's step one, is trying to make everything as real as possible, which is very important. Outside of that, obviously, the content also has to be nice to watch. So that's why we try to put a storyline in it, and we try to make sure that you kind of have this thread that you follow, and you start from an example where, oh, you're the developer of this website. You get a message saying something goes wrong. You have to go investigate. So you investigate your code and you find this vulnerability. And through finding it, you learn more about the vulnerability. And then eventually you progress from learning about the vulnerability to fixing the vulnerability. And that's kind of the idea. The videos are short and sweet. So there's always 2 videos of about 5 minutes each. So you just have to take a little bit of time out of your day, go through this story, which guides you fully through a vulnerability. And if you do something like that every month, then security will always be in the back of your mind. And that's also with the hacker mindset. The idea that we're portraying here is that you need to start to think like a hacker. If you think like a hacker once a year for 2 full days, then you're going to forget all the rest of the day. So if you do it a little bit, like 1 hour every month, then every month a new vulnerability is going to be in the back of your mind. And so, yeah, with the content, we really focus down on a single vulnerability. Besides that, I also make a lot of content specifically for hackers. hackers are a really fun audience, but I also noticed that a lot of developers are in between there, because developers are very passionate people most of the time. They love code, they love the bits and the bytes, they love to understand how things work so they can build stuff. And that perspective of an attacker breaking down things to understand how they work versus a developer building things to understand how they work is like, so I get a lot of comments from developers saying, wow, this gave me a whole new perspective into the way that I can look at my own code, or I can look at the world around me. And that's kind of also something I really like to portray. Yeah.
What I love about your videos is, and you talked about it, but I would like to emphasize this. It's a story, right? It follows a storyline, and it doesn't jump in with SQL injection is a very big problem. It's basically lives you sort of like in a mystery, like how the heck did that happen? So you're going in. I'm an IT manager. I got an alert from someone that they were able to hack us. Like, so I don't know how it happened yet. Like you leave that answer towards the middle of the video where people get a chance to try to figure out themselves how it happened. And I think it's really fun, because when you do show this, that's where the aha moment comes. Oh,
Yeah.
that's what happened. So I love that storyline. And then on the second video, yes, it's more technical, and then we just go in deep into like, okay, this is how you mitigate it. And by the way, even if you do it like this, it's not enough because there's other options. So you're sort of showing that process that you talked about, how you came back 4 times and showed how you can bypass it again and again and again and again. So I like how you sort of bring that real life experience that you mentioned earlier into the videos. So well done. I love those videos. I've learned so much from them.
Mhm.
Cool. So I think that's sort of what we wanted to talk about today. In terms of using the platform, you can sign up for free. You can use it. I think it's also something we haven't really talked about, but we're sort of repeating everything. But it's a great platform, those CTF's platform. It's a great way for hiring managers to test the skills of developers before hiring them. Because I think, we used to do some tests, but I haven't seen a lot of hiring managers doing security tests for candidates. So having a candidate, for example, solve one CDF out of the 6, whichever they want, I think will go a long way in assessing their secure coding skills prior to hiring to the team. And even if, for example, you see that there is a huge gap, that at least, and you can have them go through training. So it's not like a no-go for them to get hired, but at least they understand as well there's a gap that they need to basically fill. So I think it's a great tool both for assessing before, assessing during, and basically assessing as you go. You always have to be constantly improving, and just watching videos is not enough. It's great, but not enough. So watching videos is a way to learn, but then you put into practice by playing those CTFs and doing those events. And that's a cycle that you keep on doing. And people, there's a lot to learn. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
and don't underestimate how much there is to learn, because I really would invite you all to go look at the 6 current challenges that are up and running. If right now you have an idea of, oh, I think I will know all of this, try and give it a shot. Some of them may surprise you. So definitely go and look at them.
And the OWASP 10 is very like, yes, the OWASP 10 is the top 10, but there is so many things beyond the OWASP 10. So thinking that you're covered by the OWASP 10 alone, even the OWASP 10 started to group by a lot of things because there's just too much. So I think SQL injection became injection because there's tons of stuff. So even they found it, overwhelming, and they sort of grouped a lot of things together into single categories. And even that's not enough. So it's always continuous learning. And regardless to that, a lot of regulations like PCI and others are mandating this today. which I think is it's a good practice for everyone. So that's it. Any last thoughts before we conclude this webinar?
I have one last thought. We have an event coming up, a CTF event on May 5th, which is CTF Blitz. We've done one in February, so we invite anyone who wants to join. There's a link, that you can join very quickly. It's a free sign up. We just love people joining, hackers and developers alike. So it's a great way to kind of like mingle between the two, kinds of mindsets and think together about solutions and vulnerabilities and so forth. So it's a great event to join. I really
Yes, yeah, exactly. And how this works is, so there will be 6 hours and 6 challenges, just like the ones you just saw on the screen. Everybody, they will release at the same time, so everybody gets the same amount of time. You can kind of see how quick people solve them, and then people will be talking in Discord. We also have a prize pool, so it's amazing, an amazing opportunity to kind of join, meet new people as well, solve some challenges, and just have a fun Sunday afternoon. That's kind of the whole idea.
Yeah, I think last time we had about I think there was signed up like over 600 or something like that. I don't remember exactly the number.
Yeah.
But this is such a great opportunity to invite your team and to assess them. So you can even make it mandatory. Again, it doesn't cost anything, and there are prizes for them. What you will get out of this is a good assessment for your team. You can tell them just go in and solve one at least. They don't have to stay for the whole 6 hours, but get to a point where your dev team, this will be like the first baseline that you can achieve next month to get a good understanding of how good your team is when it comes to secure coding. Have them join anytime within those 6 hours, solve one CTF, show me that you solved it, and then see how many people were able to solve at least one from your team. And that will give you the baseline of where you are right now.
And another benefit of this can be a team building. Like, for me personally, it's one of the favorite things that I do with my colleagues. We just spend some time hacking together. That's like, and that can be a team building for everybody. Bring the team closer together, get those cross skills going. Everybody has their own ideas, and if you bring them together, you really get that team element that is also very important as a development team.
Yep. Okay, guys. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the audience. And see you next time. Bye.
Take care. See you all.